They gave me the seat of honor at Christmas dinner, poured the wine, and smiled like I was finally part of the family again. Then dessert ended, a blue folder appeared, and I realized the whole evening had been planned around one thing: my money. The gold-embossed Christmas invitation arrived in my mailbox on a crisp Tuesday morning in early November. It felt oddly formal for my son Russell and his wife Jocelyn, who lived only 20 minutes away in suburban Cincinnati. For the past 2 years, Jocelyn had treated my modest brick house like an inconvenient outpost. Visits were brief, rushed, and usually ended with an excuse about crowded schedules. I set the envelope on my kitchen counter beside my morning oatmeal. I spent 33 years working as an inventory auditor for a regional logistics firm, a career that taught me to notice patterns rather than promises. Jocelyn rarely reached out without an underlying purpose. Last Thanksgiving, she canceled our traditional dinner 3 hours before we were supposed to eat, claiming 7-year-old Toby had a sudden sniffle, only to post pictures from an upscale downtown steakhouse an hour later. Rather than calling Russell immediately to gush over the invite, I poured another half cup of black coffee and picked up my pruning shears. My backyard garden needed winter prep, and the hydrangeas were overdue for cutting back. If this invitation was genuine, I would gladly bring my homemade cranberry tart and celebrate with my grandson. But if it was another performative gesture, I needed to keep my feet firmly planted on solid ground. When Russell called that evening, his voice had that familiar, slightly strained cheerfulness he always used when reading from a script prepared by his wife. He asked if I had seen the card and insisted that I sit at the head of the table this year. "Jocelyn wants this holiday to be truly special for you, Mom," he said, clearing his throat twice. "I appreciate the gesture, Russell," I replied evenly, wiping down the kitchen counter. "I will certainly mark my calendar. I did not offer to pay for the prime rib, nor did I offer to host early prep. I simply accepted the invitation." By the first week of December, Jocelyn's sudden warmth showed no signs of slowing down. She texted me photos of Toby's school art projects almost daily, something she had never done during the preceding 3 years. Whenever I had offered to pick Toby up from his after-school soccer practices in the past, Jocelyn had politely declined, insisting that her nanny was far more reliable than a retired grandmother. Now she was asking for my opinions on festive table runners and holiday place settings. On a Friday afternoon, while I was returning home from my weekly shift volunteering at the neighborhood public library, Jocelyn's white SUV pulled into my driveway. She stepped out, holding 2 lattes from a boutique coffee shop down the street. "I just wanted to drop by and check on your holiday schedule, Valerie," she said, handing me a cardboard cup with a tight smile. She stood in my entryway, her eyes scanning my modest living room furniture, lingering briefly on the small, antique secretary desk, where I kept my household ledgers. "My schedule is quite manageable," I said, leaving the front door open to the cool winter breeze. I did not invite her deeper into the house to inspect my personal space. Tuesdays and Thursdays at the library, and my regular morning walks. "Russell tells me your pension and savings must keep things very comfortable for you here," she said casually, tapping her polished acrylic nails against her cup. "It's wonderful having no mortgage to worry about." Frugality is a long habit, Jocelyn," I replied, taking a small sip of the warm beverage. "It keeps life quiet and simple." She smiled, but the warmth did not reach her eyes. "Well, family is what truly matters during the holidays. We are so looking forward to having you with us on Christmas Day." After Jocelyn left my driveway, I sat down at my desk and pulled out my monthly banking ledger. Decades of auditing freight manifests had trained me to verify balance sheets before making assumptions. I had built a modest, stable retirement through consistent saving, careful investments, and avoiding unnecessary debt. My late husband, Arthur, and I had paid off our home 20 years ago through sheer discipline, not luck. Over the weekend, I visited my local credit union on Montgomery Road. Instead of letting my checking account sit idle, I opened a 5-year certificate of deposit that locked away a substantial portion of my liquid savings at a favorable fixed rate. I kept my standard emergency cushion and general living expenses accessible, but the surplus was now strictly committed. On Monday morning, I met my longtime neighbor Martha for our routine brisk walk around the municipal park. The cold air helped clear my thoughts as we walked the perimeter trail. Martha mentioned seeing Russell's car parked outside an expensive kitchen remodeling showroom near the highway. "They must be planning a major renovation," Martha remarked, adjusting her wool scarf. "Those quartz displays don't come cheap." I nodded slowly, putting the pieces together. Russell worked as an associate project manager for an architectural firm, while Jocelyn ran a boutique home staging venture that had struggled to turn a profit since the spring. Their lifestyle, from the leased luxury vehicles to the private school tuition, consistently outpaced their combined income. When Russell phoned me later that night to ask if I needed a ride to their house on Christmas Day, I politely declined his offer. "Thank you, Russell, but I will drive my own sedan," I told him calmly. "That way, I can head home whenever the evening winds down without inconveniencing anyone." He paused, clearly caught off guard by my self-reliance. "Sure, Mom, if that's what you prefer." 2 days before Christmas, Jocelyn called to ask if I could arrive 2 hours earlier than the rest of the guests. She claimed she wanted Toby to have private time with his grandmother before her extended family arrived from Columbus. I agreed to the earlier time, but I adjusted my preparations accordingly. I baked a simple classic apple tart and wrapped a set of illustrated science books for Toby. I purposely avoided extravagant purchases. In previous years, expensive toys I bought for Toby often vanished into garage sale piles, within months replaced by branded gadgets Jocelyn preferred to display in family photos. When I arrived at their 2-story suburban home on Christmas afternoon, the street was lined with late-model vehicles. A massive, professionally decorated spruce stood in the bay window, heavy with designer ornaments. Inside, the scent of roasting meat mingled with costly scented candles. Jocelyn met me at the entryway, wearing an elegant emerald dress, while her parents, Greg and Brenda, sat on the sectional sofa, sipping sparkling cider. "Valerie, you made it!" Jocelyn exclaimed, ushering me inside with an exaggerated embrace. She took my coat and quickly placed my wrapped gift under the tree without a second glance. Toby ran into the hallway and hugged my waist. "Grandma, did you see the giant tree?" "It is very bright, Toby," I said, softly, crouching down to his eye level and handing him the small tin of homemade cinnamon cookies I had kept in my purse. "These are for you." Russell appeared from the kitchen holding a silver platter of appetizers. He looked tired beneath his festive sweater, with dark circles under his eyes that no cheerful holiday greeting could conceal. When our eyes met, he offered a tight nod, quickly turning away to refill his father-in-law's glass. The room carried a distinct, calculated tension. Dinner was served at 5 o'clock sharp in the formal dining room. The mahogany table was set with fine porcelain-polished silverware and linen napkins folded into elaborate fan shapes. As promised, Jocelyn seated me at the head of the table, directly opposite her father, Greg, a retired auto sales manager who spent the first 20 minutes discussing the rising costs of country club memberships. Russell sat to my left, largely silent, cutting his meat into meticulous pieces, while Jocelyn directed the flow of conversation. She praised Russell's hard work at his firm, though she quickly added that his corporate bonus structure was unfairly delayed this quarter due to company restructuring. "It's just so difficult for young families to get ahead these days without institutional backing," Brenda remarked, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "The market simply doesn't reward hard work the way it used to in our generation." I chewed my green beans quietly, listening, without offering agreement or disagreement. Throughout my life, whenever people began speaking about generational entitlements at a dinner table, a financial pitch was usually just around the corner. "Valerie worked in logistics for over 3 decades, Greg said, pointing his fork toward me. "You must have seen your share of company cutbacks over the years." I saw many businesses overextend themselves by spending revenue they had not yet earned. I replied in a calm, steady tone. The ones that survived kept their overhead below their revenue. Jocelyn's smile tightened slightly at the comment. She exchanged a swift, meaningful glance with her mother across the table. Russell shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearing his throat and taking a long sip of ice water. Toby finished his meal quickly and was promptly excused to play video games upstairs, leaving the adults alone in the dining room under the glow of the chandelier. Once the dessert plates were cleared, Jocelyn stood up and walked over to the sideboard. Instead of bringing out coffee or my apple tart, she picked up a sleek navy blue presentation folder with embossed lettering on the cover. She returned to the table, her posture straight and her expression shifting into a practiced professional demeanor. Before we open gifts, there is something very exciting Russell and I want to share with the family, Jocelyn announced, smoothing her dress. She walked directly to my end of the table and slid the heavy folder across the polished wood, stopping it right beside my water glass. The cover read, Oak Ridge Creative Studio, Expansion and Equity Proposal. As you all know, my home staging company has outgrown our current storage unit, Jocelyn said, her voice projecting across the quiet room. We have an exclusive opportunity to lease a commercial storefront in the downtown district. It will allow us to secure higher-end clients and double our revenue within 18 months. I kept my hands resting calmly on my lap, looking down at the folder without opening it. We are keeping this strictly within the family. Jocelyn continued, placing a manicured hand lightly on Russell's shoulder. We need an initial capital injection of $25,000 to secure the commercial lease and complete the interior build-out before the January deadline. Russell and I thought of you first, Valerie. It's a wonderful way for you to invest your savings and actively support your grandson's future security. Across the table, Greg and Brenda nodded in unison, looking at me with expectant smiles. Russell kept his eyes glued to his empty dessert plate, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his linen napkin under the table edge. The entire room went completely silent, waiting for my response. I let the silence hang in the air for several seconds. The dining room was so quiet that the faint hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen was clearly audible. Jocelyn remained standing beside my chair, leaning forward, slightly confident that social pressure and holiday sentiment would force my compliance. I calmly reached out, placed 2 fingers on the edge of the blue folder, and slid it back across the table toward Jocelyn without opening the front cover. No, Jocelyn, I said softly, my voice firm and clear. I will not be providing $25,000 for this project. Jocelyn's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. Her eyes darted from the folder back to my face. Valerie, you haven't even looked at the financial projections. She stammered, her voice losing its polished composure. I spent weeks putting together the cash flow analysis. Russell said you had substantial liquid funds sitting in your accounts doing nothing. I turned my gaze toward my son. Russell flinched, finally looking up from his plate, his face flushed with embarrassment. My savings are fully allocated to my own retirement security and structured investments. I explained evenly, looking directly at Jocelyn. I spent 33 years auditing balance sheets. Taking on a commercial lease with high monthly overhead, when your core staging business has yet to show a consistent annual profit, is not an investment. It is an unmanaged liability. This is about family, Valerie. Brenda chimed in from across the table, her tone turning defensive. You're sitting comfortably in a paid-off house while your son is trying to build a future for his child. What else is your money for? My money is the result of 4 decades of living within my means, I replied, looking Brenda in the eye without raising my voice. It is not a contingency fund for unsustainable expansion. Jocelyn pulled the blue folder off the table, her fingers gripping the cardboard tightly. We invited you here to be part of our success. We gave you the seat of honor at our table. We wanted you to feel included in our family's next big chapter. You invited me here because you believed my presence at this table would make it awkward for me to say no in front of an audience. I stated, simply picking up my cloth napkin and placing it neatly beside my plate. You did not invite me for Christmas dinner. You invited me for a loan closing. Russell suddenly pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the floor. Mom, please, we're in a tight spot. The landlord needs the deposit by next Friday, or we lose the storefront. Jocelyn has worked really hard on this. If your household cannot secure a standard small business loan from a bank due to your debt-to-income ratio, Russell, that is a sign to scale back, not to leverage your mother's retirement, I told him, looking at him with steady clarity. You are an associate project manager. You understand budgeting. Enabling this kind of financial overreach will only harm your household in the long run. So you're just going to let us fail? Jocelyn snapped, her voice trembling with anger. After everything we've done to include you this month, including me only when an invoice is due is not inclusion. Jocelyn, I said calmly, it is a transaction. Greg opened his mouth to interject, but I held up one hand. At 66, I rose with my back straight and my footing steady. I smoothed the front of my wool cardigan, picked up my small handbag, and looked around the stunned room. Nobody moved as I walked out of the formal dining room toward the front hallway. Jocelyn stood frozen beside the mahogany table, the navy blue folder clutched against her chest, her face pale with frustration. Her parents sat in uncomfortable silence, their earlier self-righteousness completely gone. Before reaching the front door, I walked toward the foot of the stairs. Toby was sitting on the fourth step, holding the tin of cinnamon cookies I had given him earlier, looking down with wide, curious eyes. Goodbye for today, Toby, I said, gently offering him a warm, reassuring smile. Enjoy your science books. We will go to the municipal park and look at the duck pond again in the spring. Okay, Grandma, the boy replied, softly nodding. Thank you for the cookies. Russell followed me into the foyer, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked exhausted, the artificial holiday veneer completely gone. Mom, I'm sorry, he muttered, keeping his voice low so his wife wouldn't hear from the dining room. Jocelyn convinced me this was the only way to get the business off the ground. She said you wouldn't mind helping if we presented it properly. You are 36 years old, Russell, I said, putting on my winter coat and wrapping my wool scarf around my neck. You chose to let your wife use your family holiday as a stage for financial coercion. You need to start making responsible choices for your own household instead of expecting me to cushion the fallout. He looked down at the hardwood floor, unable to meet my gaze. He offered no excuses because deep down, he knew every word I spoke was true. I opened the front door, stepped out onto the porch, and walked down the illuminated walkway into the crisp December evening air. My sedan started smoothly on the first turn of the key. I pulled out of their driveway and drove through the quiet suburban streets where colored lights glowed peacefully against the dusting of snow. The knot of tension that had lingered in my chest for weeks was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, unshakable calm. When I arrived home, my modest brick house was dark, warm, and quiet. I hung my coat in the hall closet, brewed a fresh pot of chamomile tea, and sliced a generous piece of the apple tart I had baked earlier. I sat by the window in my favorite armchair, watching the snow fall gently over my dormant garden. Over the next 2 months, we settled into a new normal. Jocelyn stopped sending performative daily texts, and the commercial storefront downtown was eventually leased to an independent bookstore. Russell, however, began calling every Sunday afternoon from his office. The calls were brief, but they were honest. He no longer pretended his finances were thriving, and for the first time in years, he asked genuine questions about how his father and I had managed our household budgets during difficult seasons. In February, Russell brought Toby over to my house on a Saturday morning without Jocelyn. We baked bread together in my kitchen, and Toby spent 2 hours building miniature wooden birdhouses at my workbench in the garage. I never brought up the blue folder, and neither did Russell. The boundary had been drawn clearly, permanently, and without cruelty. My retirement funds remained secure in my accounts, my home remained my peaceful sanctuary, and the relationships in my life were finally being rebuilt on the only foundation that ever truly lasts: honesty, self-respect, and reality.